welcome to White Threads FlossTube number 26. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be giving a talk that I presented at the Great Escape Conference just outside of Auckland early last year. The talk was about the process of researching for my current book, and I thought it would be interesting for you to hear about that process. I'm actually getting quite close to being able to tell you what that book is about, hopefully with being able to release the book later on this year, all going well with printing and shipping and the current state of the world and all of that sort of thing. So that is my aim. Whether it happens, that's very much out of my control. The talk is not actually me presenting it at the conference. I didn't have anyone videoing me there, so I am rereading it for you here, and I hope you enjoy it. I was given free choice for my topic, which is both delightful and difficult. When there are so many things I could speak on, how do I choose? I decided that you might find it interesting to hear about what I do for the process of researching a book. It's a little bit different each time because each book subject that I choose is a little bit different to the last, and there is usually different information already available on each. The book I am currently working on has been quite different to the rest, and no, I am not going to tell you what it is on yet. More and more, I consider myself to be an embroidery historian. When I started out writing books, I was just an embroiderer who wanted to share some of my designs and stitching methods with others. As my career has progressed, I've come to see that by researching and diligently presenting an accurate view of the embroidery to the world, I contribute to its preservation. For me, it's very important that I present it as accurately as possible. I want to make the original custodians of the embroidery proud of the way that I present their precious embroidery. The book I'm currently working on has been planned for some time. About 4 or 5 years ago, when I was doing the research for my last book on Smoig, I was contacted by a lady, we'll call her Lauren, who asked me to write a book on a style of embroidery from her country. She felt that it was something that would interest me, and there is no current book devoted to it and how to make it, particularly not in English, and she decided that I would be the right person for the job. The embroidery is not really done as part of the culture anymore, rather it's recreated by enthusiasts who have learned from historical examples the way that I do. I did some initial research to see what I could learn about the embroidery. I couldn't find much. There were some examples in museums, but not many that I could find. Lauren roped in a knowledgeable friend, we'll call her Tamara, to also try to lobby me to write the book for them. I indicated that I was soon to be in Europe, there's your first clue, it's European, to do some research for the Smoig book. And possibly I could fit in a visit to her country to see what there was in museums to assess whether there was enough to base a book on. You see, for me to write a book on something, it has to be a legitimate and distinct style of embroidery. I need to know that there is enough in the historical record for me to learn about it. I need to know that there are a good number of historical examples for me to study. If there are only a few, it causes me to wonder if it really was a style, or if it was just Mrs. Kafoops making a few embroideries to her liking in the comfort of her lounge room and nobody else. Before I commit to writing a book, I like to know that there is actually enough to write one on. Lauren offered to host me and my husband, who was travelling with me on that trip. We tacked on about 3 days with them on the end of our trip to Norway, not knowing if Lauren and her husband would be axe murderers. But perhaps they wondered the same thing about us. Happily, none of us turned out to be axe murderers, and we had a lovely few days with them. The two husbands did some sightseeing together, while Lauren, Tamara and I did embroidery things. Before we went, Lauren and Tamara got to work contacting people to find which museums had examples for me to see. There was a slight problem in that one of the museums was closed during my allocated visit dates while they relocated its collection. However, Lauren and Tamara took me to some museums and also arranged for me to visit a private collection, which I consider myself very fortunate to have been able to view. I was able to see some lovely examples of the embroidery, despite the fact that the regional museum with the most relevant items in its collection was closed at the time. It was beautiful work, and I liked the look of it. I could see that I would be happy to devote a couple of years to the embroidery. That's an important point. I was also able to assess that it was a real style, and there were definitely examples to study, and probably enough of them if what I had seen was a good representative sample. Over Lauren's dining room table, she and Tamara showed me books and magazines from their culture that covered the embroidery, though not the way they wanted me to cover it. And they showed me some examples that they had worked in the style. I had been thinking it over, and they were delighted when I told them that yes, I would write their book. I explained that it would still be a few years away because I had to do the Smoig one first, and then I'd need to properly research and write their book. They didn't care how long it took. They just wanted to know that I would do it. They wanted to know that this particular regional embroidery would be documented and that people would be taught to make it, thereby keeping it alive. And so, in February 2018, while I was still working on the Smoig book, I had the opportunity to go to Paris, to La Guerlain Fête, the big craft show in Paris, and then also went to Mystery Destination to do the research. The museum I needed to visit had now moved its collection to the new premises, so it was available for me to visit. The curator had also impressed upon me the urgency of my visit because she was going to retire in August, and if I wanted to learn what I could from her, I'd have to do it before she retired. There was also the possibility that she was not going to be replaced. I spent 2 lovely days visiting the museum storage facility with her. She had chosen a large selection of items for me to study. I was able to handle them with gloves on and photograph them. This I did, fronts and backs, whole items and details. I made notes for the photographs and also on the catalogue records that the curator had provided for me. While she was a textile curator, knitting and knot embroidery was her specialty. However, I was able to ask her many questions and she provided answers where she could. We stopped for lunch each day, joining the other staff in the staff room. They were surprised and impressed that I had come all the way from Australia to learn about their embroidery. This seems to be quite common wherever I go, researching any of my books. They're always surprised when someone comes so far for their regional embroidery. At the end of the first day, I thought I'd come to the end of the items she'd selected for me, but she assured me she had many more items for me for the next day. She also gave me a tour of the facility and showed me some of the choice items from other parts of the collection, which was a real joy to see them. I requested and was granted permission to use my photographs for publication. Some museums allow you to photograph for personal use only. In that case, I would have been able to study the photos and learn from them, but not use them in my resulting book. Some museums only allow you to use their photos, which of course you pay for. I find the smaller the museum, the more generous they tend to be with their images. They're just happy to have people see their items around the world. Since finishing the Smoig book and moving on to the current book, what have I done with this to learn more? I've written lists of stitches, lists of motifs. I've written instructions for many of the stitches. Where they are stitches I know, that's quite easy. Where they are stitches that are new to me, that involves looking at the front and back of the stitch, getting a needle, thread and fabric and trying to reproduce the stitch. Mostly, it's not easy. It takes many attempts trying new ideas and tweaking things. You might get the front right and realise the back is wrong, and in which case the method is wrong. So you try a new idea and you keep trying until you get it right. There is one stitch in particular that I have wrestled with. I've tried many different ways and I mentioned my difficulties to Tamara. She suggested a foreign language reference book with similar instructions. It showed about 4 ways of doing the stitch, but none of them were exactly what I was trying to reproduce. So I borrowed from here and there, and eventually I came up with a method that I thought was a good approximation of the original stitch. I then wrote and diagrammed it out and sent it to her and another friend that she had suggested. They both wrote back and said, yes, that's a correct way to do it, and that by following my instructions, they'd produced a good result. I've also started charting the motifs. There's another clue for you, it's counted. By doing this, I acquaint myself with the motifs and can work out the likely methods for them to be stitched. It also means that I can look for motifs that are common and less common. I can evaluate what were almost necessary elements to the style and which things are more outliers. From the research, I have realised that not only is there enough information for me to put in a book about the style of the embroidery, there is possibly too much. There are so many different stitches used and about 3 main variations of the style, all of which really need to be documented. I still don't know whether I'll be able to fit it into one book or whether there will need to be 2. I vacillate regarding this. There are good reasons why 1 would be good, and there are good reasons why 2 would also be good. If I keep writing and the book ends up being as heavy as a brick, I'll probably split it into 2 books. But then do I make them standalone books, or will we have to accept that you need the first book to be able to properly use the second? So many questions and things to figure out. As I have been documenting the stitches and motifs and working out what makes the style a style, I've also been considering threads to use and projects to make. I like to use threads and fabric that are as close to the original as possible. Sometimes this is quite difficult and involves quite a search to find suitable things. I might be looking for a particular fibre, such as linen, wool, cotton or silk. It might need to come in a range of thicknesses. It might need to have a particular twist, or just the right amount of sheen. It might need to be fluffy, or it might need to be smooth. All these are things I consider, as well as the ability of my readers around the world to be able to access the threads I suggest. I have designed some projects and stitched some. I'm still very much in the learning stage at this point, so it may be that some of the things that I have made get discarded at a later point and replaced by other things. It's actually all part of the learning process. By actually stitching the motifs and designs, I learn so much. I also researched the history of the style and how it fits into the culture it came from. Is it similar to other styles elsewhere in the world? How is it different? The researching is one of my favourite stages of book writing. I love to learn, and I learn so much when researching for my books. I really hope that love of learning comes through in my books and that I can share the joy of what I have learned with others. At the end of the talk, I offered that if anyone had any questions, that they were very welcome to ask them. We're not in the same sort of format, so you can't ask me a question and I answer it straight away. But if you do have questions, I'd be very happy for you to comment below, ask those questions, and I'll answer them for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and I'd love it if you'd share this with others. Thanks very much. Bye.